And I come back at a time when agriculture is very much on the agenda, very exciting time for agriculturalists. They waited for me to retire before they brought agriculture back. But I do sense a feeling of déjà vu, that it's actually almost 40 years to the year since I first came to Washington professionally, and I came as a young professional at the World Bank. And at that time, was a very exciting time in the World Bank. McNamara was the new president, and the main agenda was agriculture. There were hundreds of agriculturalists at the World Bank, and it was the lion's share of the lending program. It was a time when the Green Revolution had a full head of steam, and a continent that only 5 years before had seemed hopeless. Massive poverty, famine, uncontrolled population growth rates. People were writing off Asia as a lost continent. By the early 70s, the agricultural revolution was just transforming all that, and the World Bank was at the heart of that with its lending program. And the McNamara vision was to bring that green revolution to transform Africa. So beginning in the early 70s, we had 2 decades of big investment in African agriculture. The World Bank put billions of dollars in. I know USA did, most of the other big donors, most of the African countries invested their own money. For 20 years this went on, and African agriculture didn't have a revolution, unlike Asia. And the gloom and the doom began to set in, and by the mid-80s, people were very pessimistic about African agriculture. The lectures, the books, the journals, the newspapers were all telling us why it was all the bad news, why African agriculture is not going to develop. And that led to 2 decades of pessimism, turning away from agriculture, which is now reversed today. So there we are, by almost a full cycle. It's turned out that the last 2 decades trying to develop Africa without agriculture has proved even more disastrous than the 2 decades where we tried to develop it through agriculture. So this is really why African agriculture is back on the agenda. But now that it is back, the key challenge is to move forward in ways that we don't repeat all those mistakes of the past, all those billions of dollars that went in and didn't do the job. Have we really learnt the lessons? We've learnt a lot of things about what went wrong. We haven't learnt very much about what we do to actually, what are we going to do it, how are we going to do it differently this time round so that we're going to be successful? So that in 20 years' time, me or somebody like me has to stand here and deal with another round of disappointment, another round of pessimism. And really that's what this study has attempted to address. It wasn't all total failure. We tend to think it was. Africa still feeds itself. It's 8-10 million tons of food short each year, but it's got more than 3 times as many people as it did in the early 1970s. So there has been progress. There is a lot more food produced in Africa, and there have been real success stories. And we've found quite a number. I am not going to steal Steve's thunder, but when we asked for nominations of successes in African agriculture, we got a surprisingly large number. And several of those have been chosen for rigorous analysis to understand why they were successful. And that's what this book is about. Steve is going to make the main presentation. My role in this has been very much a midwife, I think. I had the germ of the idea and raise funds and help put the team together and so on, but the real mother, the guy who went through all the pain and has delivered the baby, is sitting on my right, and I'm going to be the good midwife and give the mother back his baby. But I just want to say where I come out from all this is with 3 major lessons. One is that if you really want success at scale and sustained over time, then you really do need a whole, what we now call a market chain approach. You really do have to have a significant shift on the productivity side, and you really have to have a significant shift in the marketing arrangements. It's when you get increased production, sustained increases in production, linked to real market opportunities that can be sustained over time. That's when you get real impact, where you get big growth in production, real increases in incomes for lots of people, which is sustained over significant periods of time. Too many interventions in African agriculture have been looking at sort of a magic bullet approach. One little constraint, if we can overcome that, we'll get success. And you can, but you get flashes of success, like the flashing Christmas light. You don't get the scale, you don't get the sustained effort. You really have to have the whole market chain, and you've got to have significant improvement in the productivity of the system. The second lesson is that it takes time. Agriculture is a very complicated industry. Development processes have long lead times. R&D, it can take you 10, 15 years to develop improved varieties of some crops. It takes time to build marketing institutions. And in nearly all these case studies, it took a decade or more for the thing really to take off. It took sustained commitment by the key actors, whether it was the government supporting the R&D system or the donors in supporting some other aspects of the market chain. It was a sustained intervention over time that really made the difference. You can't transform African agriculture overnight. You can have World Food Conferences and talk about transforming it overnight. But when you get down to it, you need that sustained commitment, and particularly for donors, it's not a lesson they like, but you're going to have to invest for the next 10, 15 years in some of these key areas if you want to achieve significant progress. You're not going to have quick results to report at the next World Food Security Conference next year. And finally, there are many pathways to success. There are many different actors out there. There are a lot of private sector players today, a lot of NGOs out there, a lot of public organizations and so on. There are lots of different kinds of configurations, partnerships that can come together for success. There isn't a one-size-fits-all shoe for this. The Green Revolution model in Asia, which was very state-controlled, state-dominated, top-down, was appropriate for Asia at that time. It's not the appropriate model for Africa. It wasn't in the early 1970s. That was one of our mistakes. It is certainly not the appropriate model today, where there is a much richer institutional landscape out there in terms of other key players, even other sources of funds. The private sector, not only as a player but as an investor, is a very powerful force in Africa today, something that wasn't true in Asia in the 1970s. So diverse pathways to success. A key lesson, I think, for something like the CAADP process, which I'm not going to start criticizing CAADP processes, but let's not slip back into the state-dominated top-down approach. Let's look at the diversity of opportunity that can be tapped, and different kinds of partnerships for food staples for small farms than you need for high-value crops for small farms. But I'm going to turn over to Steve, who will provide a lot of the real meat from the book. Thank you very much.